Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here and welcome back to another painting tutorial. This time I'm going to be showing you how you can paint the new Stormcast Eternals that are found within the Soul Wars box set. And as always, I'll be using the Citadel range of paints to do so. Before I started painting the miniature, I primed with a black spray primer and then used the Retributor Armour spray over the top. This meant that I wouldn't need to worry about brushing on the base coat of the gold armour, which will help to save time. I prefer to paint my miniatures from the inside out, starting with the harder to reach parts of the miniature, working my way up. This will mean that you won't accidentally spill over onto already painted areas by trying to get into those nooks and crannies with your brush. So with this in mind, we want to start off by painting the armour. We have already achieved our base coat of Retributor Armour, which means we can dive straight into a wash. With my wash, I wanted to add shading into the recesses without losing that burnished gold colour. Therefore, I settled on using Seraphim Sepia across the entirety of the armour, as it wouldn't darken or dull down the final result quite as much as Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil would. With the Seraphim Sepia wash completed, we can now move on to highlighting the armour's edges. To complete the gleaming gold finish, I decided to use Stormhost Silver. The bright silver colour creates the effect of light reflecting off the surface when painted on in a thin line. I would recommend using a small brush for this task, as it will allow you to paint that small line along those hard edges and raised details. Now that our armour is completed, we can now start to work on some of the Sequitors details, with the first of these being the blue robes, and for this we want to start off with a base coat of Kantor Blue. As Kantor Blue is a base paint, it should cover nicely over the Retributor Armour base coat, but I would recommend using a layering technique to ensure perfect coverage. As with all of your base coats, mixing in a small amount of water with your paint and applying at least 2 thinned layers will give it a much smoother finish. Once your Kantor Blue base coat is dried, you can then apply a wash of Drankenhof Nightshade to add some subtle shading to all of those folds in the cloth. We can now start applying our edge highlights to the robes, and for this we will be using Teclis Blue. This highlight can be used to create a thin line on the cloth's folds and creases. The final step in painting the blue robes is to paint what I call an extreme highlight. This is a lot like our previous highlights, but instead we focus our attention to the sharper, more pronounced edges such as the corners. By using the lighter Lothern Blue, we really be able to enhance those details. We will start our painting of the blue gem that hangs at the Sequitor's waist with a base coat of Thousand Suns Blue. As the gem is such a small detail, we can forego the wash and move straight onto highlighting using Baharroth Blue. The red areas of the miniature include the inner lining of the tabard, the plumes of the Sequitor Prime, and also the gem in the Stormsmite Great Mace. We will be base coating all of these areas using Mephiston Red. The wash that we'll be using on the red areas will be Agrax Earthshade. This will give us a rich, deep red colour whilst also applying some shading into those recesses. The final step in painting our red areas is to highlight the edges using Evil Sunz Scarlet. The light colouring of the tabard and parchment is something that we will need to be approached carefully in order to achieve a smooth transition between the lighter and darker areas of the fabric. So we want to start off with a solid base coat of Rakarth Flesh. Remember to use the layering technique that we employed earlier, as we want to ensure a nice, even coverage. Following the base coat, we now want to apply a wash of Seraphim Sepia over the tabard and the parchment. I have chosen this particular wash for this task, as it will only subtly apply shading and will not darken down the colour too much. In this next step, we'll be doing something a little different than before. Instead of jumping straight into the highlight following our wash, we'll instead want to create a transition. Essentially, we'll be creating a gradient between the darker areas in the recesses and the lighter parts on the raised sections of the cloth. For this task, you'll want to mix together in equal quantities some Ushabti Bone and Lamium Medium. Apply this translucent mixture over the robes, leaving only the darker parts of the cloth untouched. Once this first layer has dried, do the same again, but don't go quite as far into the recesses. Repeat this process several times more, reducing the area you paint each time, and you should be left with a smooth transition between the deep folds and the raised cloth. You can finish off the transitions with a thin line of Pallid Wych flesh along the most prominent folds. As an optional extra, you can also paint a thin line of corn red around the inside edge of the tabard. However, I would only recommend tackling this step if you have a steady hand and you're comfortable painting freehand. The next area to tackle are the black leather areas of the miniature. We'll start off by painting the belt, straps, gloves and cloth beneath the armour using Abaddon Black. There is little need to apply a wash over Abaddon Black, so we can move straight onto the highlight step. I'll be using Eshin Grey to paint a thin line along the edges of the black leather areas. The final step in painting the black leather areas is to apply an extreme highlight to the most prominent areas using Dawnstone. For the maroon coloured leather wrappings around the weapon handle, we want to start off with a base coat of Screamer Pink. To pick out the fine detailing on the straps, you should follow up your base coat with a wash of Carroburg Crimson. Finish off the weapon handle with an edge highlight of Pink Horror along each of the leather wrappings edges. The final metallic material left to paint on your Sequitors are the steel areas. These parts include the weapon heads, the anvil iconography, chains and studs. Base coat all of these areas using Leadbelcher. A wash of Nuln Oil over your metal will help to emphasise the detailing in these areas. For the head of the maces and mauls, I like to paint Ironbreaker onto alternating panels. You'll be left with a kind of checkerboard style pattern across the various facets of the weapon's head. This will help to create the appearance that the metal areas are reflecting light. The final step is to apply an edge highlight of Stormhost Silver across all of the steel areas. When painting white, it can be tricky to achieve a smooth finish, but this can be helped along by using a base paint such as Celestra Grey. Apply this paint to the inside of the blue robes and to any lightning bolt iconography, and remember to paint with at least 2 thin coats. To lighten up the Celestra Grey, we again want to use some Lamium Medium. Create an equal parts mixture of White Scar and Lamium Medium and follow the same techniques that we used on the tabard. Build up the layer so that the white is bright and smooth, whilst leaving the slightly darker Celestra Grey still visible in the recessed areas. And here we have the completed Sequitor. As you can see, I've reattached a shield and also applied a simple basing scheme. Now whilst this video focused specifically on the Sequitors, you could easily apply these same colours and techniques to any of the other Stormcast miniatures found within Soul Wars. You can also find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below. And so that concludes this video on painting the Sequitors from Soul Wars. If you enjoyed this video, please do let me know in the comments below, and also leave me your suggestions for other tutorials you would like to see me tackle. Now if you haven't done so already, you can support this channel by heading over to my Patreon page, and from there you can donate to me from as little as $1 a month. That just helps me to produce these videos. So the only thing left to say is thanks for watching, and goodbye.